Well, hello, everybody. This is Congressman Mike Levin. It is terrific to be with you for our virtual town hall. And I'll tell you what, I am so thrilled to be able to answer some of your questions. We've got a lot of great questions that came in, and also really just honored to continue to represent our great district. It's been a wonderful day. We started out this morning with the Oceanside Independence Day parade, and we've had three events since then. And this is now our 112th town hall. And I'm just so grateful to my entire team, both in the district and in Washington, for their hard work all these last 5, 6, 7 years. It's really incredible, all the hard work that they do. And thanks to Jeremy, who makes the virtual town halls happen. I host all kinds of town halls, in person, virtual, telephone, different types of town halls, work for different folks, and really is great to be able to interact in all these different ways. I'm going to provide some updates on my work, and then, of course, the good part, answer some of the questions that you submitted. I want to just begin by expressing my condolences to the families that were impacted by the recent multi-vehicle crash near Camp Pendleton. Really incredible how awful this tragedy was, around 3 o'clock in the morning, as I understand it. And I just want to say my office is ready to assist in any way that we can. My family and I are keeping all those in our thoughts, particularly those members of our military who were impacted as part of all of this. I also want to briefly touch base about the presidential debate earlier this week. And look, I will tell you that I was very concerned about both of the candidates. And I think that as a supporter of the president, I think he will take this 4th of July holiday to discuss with his closest advisors a path forward. And I look forward to hearing more from him in the days and the weeks ahead. But in the meantime, as is always the case, my focus will remain on this district, on delivering results for our communities. And that's how it's always been and how it's always going to be, regardless of what else is happening with national politics. Let me turn to my updates for you from Washington. And this week we celebrated a very important anniversary, the second anniversary of the Supreme Court overturning the Roe versus Wade decision, putting reproductive rights at risk for millions of American women. Also, you may have seen this week the Supreme Court ruled on an emergency abortion case out of Idaho. And while the ruling will allow the women of Idaho to continue to have access to emergency abortion services, the court did not say that all Americans can access emergency care when their health is in immediate danger. So it should be pretty straightforward. Americans facing a health emergency should be able to access the care they need, full stop. The court's ruling, unfortunately, left the door open to future challenges on emergency care and, just as important, further erosion of reproductive rights and freedoms. And look, I think it's very clear. Extremist Republicans are going to push the envelope as far as they can. They've already talked at every level of government about restricting women's access to health care. They've done this at every turn. It is dangerous. It is putting millions of lives at risk. Extremist Republicans have also made clear that if they're in charge of Congress and if they have Donald Trump in the White House, they will pass a national abortion ban. They'll also go after IVF. They'll go after contraception. They've said it publicly. They've tried to pass legislation. We've tried to pass legislation for the Women's Health Protection Act. We fought them at every step. We'll continue to fight them at every step. And I can tell you that there couldn't be any starker difference between our priorities and the priorities of extreme Republicans, including my opponent. So look, reproductive rights, access to health care, they're on the ballot this year. And for me, it's pretty simple. Medical decisions should always be made between a woman and her doctor, period, full stop. The government should not get in the middle of those decisions. We can't let Republicans take away our access to health care, our ability to make our own health decisions, and it's all about freedom, right? Reproductive freedom. Another thing I want to talk about is the ongoing impact that we see of the climate crisis. Recently, our district has been severely impacted by extreme weather patterns, brutal heat waves, wildfires, and droughts. Just this week, there was a wildfire at the edge of our district that forced some residents to evacuate. Climate change is here. It's impacting all of us on a daily basis, and we must act to prevent irreversible damage to our planet and ensure that future generations are able to thrive in our communities. Thankfully, congressional Democrats in 2022 passed landmark legislation to tackle the climate crisis, make historic investments in clean energy. And those investments are underway across the country. They're helping our country transition to clean, renewable energy, reduce pollution, and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And it really is all about energy security and energy independence, clean energy independence. So as a former environmental attorney, far more importantly, as the father of two young children, climate change and environmental issues are deeply personal to me. We can't continue down a path where fossil fuel companies exploit our planet without consequence. We've got to do all we can to transition to a clean, sustainable energy future that protects our planet and benefits our economy as well. Unfortunately, Republicans want to block the progress that we've made. They want to turn back the clock to the dirty energy policies of the past. They're ready to cut investments in clean energy. They're ready to gut the Environmental Protection Agency and get rid of laws that keep our air and our water clean and safe. We've seen with recent decisions that the conservative majority of the Supreme Court is all too eager to help them. And if Donald Trump returns to the White House, make no mistake, he has made it absolutely clear he will roll back regulations. He will let the big oil and gas companies do whatever they want. How do we know this? Because he told them. He said, donate $1 billion to his campaign, and in return, you get free reign to do whatever you want. It's very sad. It's unacceptable. We can't stand for it. We've got to stand for our environment, for our air and our water, and the health of our communities and the future of our planet. It is all on the line. Now, let me turn to some investments in our district. I'm so excited about this. If you go to our website at mikelevin.org, we've got an interactive map of our district with all of the different federal projects we've been able to deliver across our district in these last 5 years. And I'm so excited to tell you that since taking office in 2019, I've secured over $911 million in federal funds for projects up and down the district that are improving the quality of life for all our residents. These projects tackle our local priorities, and they include sand replenishment, upgrades to roads, new equipment for law enforcement, new water infrastructure, pedestrian safety, and much, much more. Recently, I announced over $32 million to go to 3 critical water desalination projects to increase water security and water supply. So important. There's at least one project in every city in the district. And again, for a full list of projects and descriptions, visit my website, mikelevin.org. Finally, I'd like to just spend a minute on our border and our immigration challenges. I know it's top of mind for many of you. President Biden recently issued executive actions on border security, asylum processing, and permits for the spouses of undocumented, or the undocumented spouses, I should say, of American citizens. These actions, I think, were steps in the right direction. They'll strengthen our border. They'll keep families together. They'll maintain our strong economy. They'll regulate the U.S. asylum system more efficiently. All those are positive steps. And as a result of the actions, we've recently seen a decrease, not as much of a decrease as I would like, but a decrease in unlawful crossings between the ports of entry. Well, I was glad to see the president act. In the face of Republican obstruction, executive action is no substitute for congressional legislation. I've taken numerous trips to the border, and it's clear that Congress must come together and find bipartisan solutions to meet the demands and the challenges that we're facing. Our legal immigration pathways are inadequate. The process to apply for work permits is archaic. We need bipartisan legislation to create legal pathways to citizenship for immigrants who've been living in and contributing to our country for a long, long time, including our dreamers who came here at a young age. We also need to recruit thousands of new Border Patrol agents and to hire more immigration judges to close out the backlog of asylum cases. The challenge we face at the border, in my view, is best characterized as a national security issue. It cannot be Democratic versus Republican. When it comes to national security, it's got to be nonpartisan. And that's what I'm going to continue to fight for. And look, we had an opportunity earlier this year to pass meaningful legislation that would have updated our asylum system, would have improved border security. And that bill was considered the most realistic border bill in decades. And don't take it from me. Go back to when that bill was introduced. Before President Trump got involved, that bill had the support of scores of Republican senators and of the Border Patrol Union and so many other organizations historically considered at odds with President Biden on this issue. They came around, they supported it because I think it's the right policy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. So what happened? Trump killed the bill. I think we all know that. At his urging, Republicans voted against what would have been the most comprehensive border security legislation in decades because they chose to prioritize politics in an election year over working together in good faith to do what's right and solve a very, very vexing problem. So what needs to happen now? Congress needs to come back to the negotiating table. Members of both parties need to continue discussing. They need to continue to visit the border in their regions and in other regions on a bipartisan basis. And I am willing to work with any Republican colleague who is willing to work with me in good faith to tackle the challenges that we're facing at the border. That's always my commitment to you on that issue and on every other issue, to do all we can to work together in good faith. Now I'd like to turn to some of your questions. And we'll start with Tristan from Del Mar. Tristan asks, Imperial Beach in San Diego has been rated as the most polluted beach in the country, mostly due to runoff from the Tijuana watershed. I know this is out of your district, but what can you do to address this mess? Well, let me tell you, first, I am incredibly concerned by this. It's dangerous, it's unsanitary, and we've got to bring federal resources to bear. When I first started in the Congress in 2019, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal facilitated the negotiation of $300 million to tackle this problem. And at the time, my hope, my expectation in helping us secure that money was that it would do the job. And unfortunately, it turns out after further investigation of the status of the South Bay plant, they determined that it actually needed more money still, more like double that. I can tell you that since then, since that initial $300 million, we were able to secure another $156 million. So we're up to about $456 million. We may need more still, but I won't give up until the job is done and they can get started. The folks down there can get started with the money that they have, and they should. And it should have happened already. I am perennially impatient about this. It's very personal for many of us who have got friends and family who have trained as Navy SEALs down at Coronado, who know the health and safety impacts that it's had on our military and on all the communities surrounding IB and the whole area. They have all been impacted by this. We're not going to stop until the job is done, until those beaches are reopened. And you say, well, why do you care? You represent North County. Here's the deal. The pollution down at the border makes its way all the way up to our district, and we've got to be cognizant of that. It impacts our entire region's water quality. Next question is from Melissa in Carlsbad. Melissa asks, in your opinion, is the Supreme Court's unanimous decision to protect access to abortion pills a sign that the court will continue to protect abortion and contraception to some extent, or should this decision be written off as a fluke due to procedural errors in the legal arguments? Melissa, that is an excellent question. What I will tell you is that the conservative majority on the Supreme Court has made it clear that anything can happen to reproductive rights. Anything is on the table. They undermined 52 years with Roe versus Wade, and I wouldn't be surprised by anything that they do, which is why it's so critically important that we codify the standard in Roe versus Wade, and we protect a woman's right to choose. Let me talk about the abortion pill case for just a second. The court found that the groups that brought the case had no legal standing to do so. So it still leaves the door open for future challenges. And although the abortion pill will remain on the market, another group can potentially challenge this. They could potentially jeopardize access. I would expect them to try. And look, just this week, the court did leave the door open for future challenges to access emergency abortion services. I spoke about this a minute in the intro with that case in Idaho. And we basically have to expect that precedent that they're setting will also impact IVF, will also impact contraception. You know, we have what's known as a discharge petition in the House. That is something when you're in the minority, which we are as House Democrats today, hopefully not after November. When you're in the minority, you can have a petition, if signed by a majority of the members, to discharge a bill that's stuck in committee because the majority party won't hear the bill and won't move it to the floor. And we have a bill called the Right to Contraception Act that would provide a legislative right for people to be able to use contraception. And unfortunately, Republicans won't even support that. They won't even support that bill. And it's really tragic. The MAGA Republican Party is way out of step with the vast majority of Americans on this issue and on many other issues as well. So what do we need to do? We've got to flip the House, and ultimately we've got to do all we can to take the Senate and the White House to be able to codify Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. And that bill is called the Women's Health Protection Act. I was proud to co-sponsor it each of the last two Congresses. Roger from San Clemente asks, I keep seeing voices in the liberal media space fearmonger a plan called Project 2025. A lot of times they act like it's the blueprint for ending our democracy. This seems extreme to me. Do you agree? Well, it is a blueprint, and it is out there for people to see. And it has been written by extreme MAGA Republicans to prepare for a second Trump administration. And look, it's very scary, Project 2025. I can tell you that a number of us in the House have come together and created a Project 2025 task force to deal with the 900 pages worth of documents and plans that they put together. This is groups like the American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, so forth. And the reality is that they want to gut the civil service system. Russell Vought, who was Donald Trump's director of the Office of Management and Budget in the first Trump administration, has been behind a lot of this. And they want to gut the administrative state to the point where they're going to take around 50,000 career civil servants. Think of the experts, scientists, and other experts in the different agencies who are non-political, who are loyal to the Constitution, not to the Democrats, not to the Republicans. They want to replace all those people with political appointees whose first and most important qualification is their loyalty to Donald Trump, not their fidelity to the Constitution, not their knowledge and expertise with regard to their jobs, but loyalty to Donald Trump. That is not how the American democratic system works. It's not how it's worked in many, many decades. And I think it would be a travesty. The other thing about Project 2025 that I'll highlight, the notion of impoundment. So the president faithfully executes the laws as passed by the legislative branch. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's worked for a long time. Richard Nixon was the last to try to impound the money that has been authorized and appropriated by the legislative branch and refused to spend that money, refused to faithfully execute the laws. And that's what the Constitution demands. And the president, in the case of Trump, in a second Trump term, would try to impound a lot of those funds on things that he doesn't want to fund. But I would argue it's not his prerogative to do that. The Constitution doesn't support that. American system's not designed, or checks and balances are not designed for that. And that's part of Project 2025 as well. And it's really, really scary. I would just Google Project 2025. You can learn all about it with a simple Google search. I'm concerned you should be too. And I hope you remember this November when you go to the polls. The next question is from Kim in San Clemente. Kim says, thank you for your work in fixing our beach and coast in San Clemente. What will stop the next storm from washing away all of the newly added sand? Thank you so much for that great question. Let me just put it in context. I was so honored to be able to join local elected officials of both parties recently in San Clemente to commemorate 100,000 cubic yards of sand being placed on the beach there between Linda Lane and T Street. That comes just a few weeks after we did a similar ribbon cutting for roughly 1 million cubic yards of sand in Encinitas and Solana Beach. So grateful to be able to deliver those resources through the bipartisan infrastructure law and through a community project funding request. But what your question is, I think, is very worthwhile, a very good question, which is, doesn't the ocean just wash away the sand? Isn't this just a fruitless exercise? And here's the reality. I think that all of the sand projects are vitally important to widen our beaches and to protect our coastal rail corridor for the near term. We know that every year we've seen our rail corridor at risk. We've seen things shut down in San Clemente in particular because of landslides. This will help. Sand will really help. We want to see the sand stay on the beach. It's a 50-year commitment from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's not a one-time deal. And we believe that every 5 to 6 years is where we will need sand replenishment over that 50-year commitment. And we've got to go back every 5 to 6 years and make sure we appropriate those funds for those projects. What I can tell you is that I've been working with a lot of people who are experts in the field. One of them is Professor Brett Sanders, who joined me as a guest at our town hall earlier this year. He's a professor at UC Irvine, and he's one of the leading experts anywhere about where sand replenishment makes the most sense and where it doesn't. And so we're turning to him to best understand where those federal dollars are going to stretch the furthest. But again, we're talking about a 50-year commitment. That's a big deal. And we're going to keep at it. And we're going to make sure we have sand on our beaches. And we also need stabilization measures along parts of the rail corridor. And we need lots and lots of stakeholder engagement to make sure that we can achieve community consensus around the right path forward for the rail corridor, both in San Diego County and in Orange County. Thank you so much for the question. Next is from Michael in Dana Point, great name. Michael asks, this summer we're already seeing hotter temperatures than ever recorded. North Atlantic Ocean temperatures are beating last year's record highs. The effects of this point towards climate catastrophe. Why isn't there more of an urgency for Congress to do something? Well, Michael, I appreciate that question very much. I can tell you this has been my entire adult life's, most of my adult life's work, working on climate and energy policy. And when I first got to Washington, after having run as a clean energy advocate, literally as my ballot designation, I was told, you'll never be able to do a major climate bill because the politics are no good. And they failed to do it in the past. And we just kept at it. We kept at it. And I was very honored to get put on the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis by then Speaker Pelosi. And we worked on a broad portfolio of potential legislation that could get across the finish line should we have the opportunity. Back then, we did not because we had Donald Trump in the Oval Office. But we got prepared. And then the opportunity came after the 2020 election with President Biden. And we went forward with the boldest climate legislation in the history of any country, which all was included in the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of people don't know about it because the title of the bill was Inflation Reduction Act. That was Joe Manchin's decision, but make no mistake, the policies in that bill are transformative. Not only will they help incentivize really accelerating the deployment of more sustainable energy, but also everything from how we build buildings to how we grow food to how we build the electricity infrastructure necessary to support all the new renewable energy that we're going to need. It's a very, very exciting and transformative investment. When coupled with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the things in there for things like zero emission vehicles, it's really, really exciting. We just have to keep at it. I've said all along, as a representative for an area that has some of the best climate scientists in the world, where the Keeling curve and so much else was originally derived. We've got to listen to our experts and we've got to act accordingly, commensurate with what science demands. That's what I've tried to do in Congress. It's what I'll always try to do. The last thing I'll say is that it's good not only for our environment and our climate and our future, it's good for our economy. Every other country, major industrialized country, is trying to win the race for clean energy because they know that it will create the jobs of the future. We can win the race here in the United States, but we've got to get smart. We can't embrace the dirty energy policies of the past. We've got to move beyond towards a clean energy future. I'm committed to doing it. I will never, consider the job done because it's such a daunting task, but we just got to keep at it. And that's what I'm going to do. Betty from Oceanside asks, I saw in the news that companies like Target, Walmart, and Walgreens finally announced more consumer-friendly prices. What can be done to ensure the incentive for corporations to lower prices stays in place? Well, here's the thing. I think after the pandemic, Betty, it's very clear that you had far too many companies that basically saw the opportunity to raise prices. You can call it price gouging, you can call it whatever you want, but that's the reality of what happened. And I think that we need more competition in our markets. It's always helpful to push back on any sort of anti-consumer behavior. I'm glad to see the course correction by some of these companies, but there's no guarantee that it's going to stay in place. And I think we also need strong federal oversight to make sure that these companies aren't engaged in any sort of market manipulation or price gouging. Let me also say this. I think it's really an important point. There was a report last week by Moody's Analytics. Moody's Analytics and Mark Sandy is their lead economist. Mark Sandy actually was an advisor to John McCain. So this is no liberal Democratic economist. And his report from last week basically spelled out what would happen in another Trump term or another Biden term. And he talks about the policies that Trump and Republicans would put in place, specifically 10% tariffs across the board on all imported goods. Next, tax cuts for very wealthy people funded by deficit spending. And then third, extremely restrictive immigration policies that, in their estimation, would lead to about 4 million fewer people in the country by the end of a second Trump term. And from that, they analyzed what would the economic impacts be. And what they found, independent analysis, is that number one, it would lead to more inflation, particularly the tariffs would lead to more inflation as costs go up for people to do business in our country and have to import materials that are now more expensive. Number two, because the inflation rate would go up, the Fed would raise interest rates again. Unemployment would go up, and the debt to GDP ratio would go up. Right now, it's about 100%. I think, frankly, that's too much. It would go up in a second Trump term to about 115%. And ultimately, according to this independent analysis, we would be in a recession by the middle of 2025. That's not my analysis. That's Mark Sandy at Moody's. You can look it up. You can Google his name, Zandi, and you can see it for yourself. On the other hand, what happens with the second Biden term? Second Biden term, a lot of the policies stay in place. The Trump tax cuts are expiring for those making under $400,000, or excuse me, for those making over $400,000. They would have to pay their fair share. Under $400,000, no taxes raised on anyone. Those policies continue in place. Inflation goes down to 2% by the middle of next year. Growth and productivity goes up. Debt to GDP stays at around where it is today. Unemployment stays at around where it is today. And the average American has more money in their pocket to be able to pay for things at stores like Walmart and Target, et cetera. I think the contrast couldn't be any clearer, and I hope that more people will be speaking about this over the next 4 months before the election. Next question is from Desiree from Laguna Niguel. Desiree says, Supreme Court justices such as Clarence Thomas seem not to see a problem with taking gifts from billionaires who have cases in front of the court, and this is an outrage. How can you work to ensure that this lack of ethics on the court is turned around? Well, here's what I'll say. We need an enforceable judicial code of ethics. Every other court in America has an enforceable code of ethics with the exception of the U.S. Supreme Court. And John Roberts, Chief Justice, came out with a code of ethics that was weak and unenforceable. And so what I have said is that Congress should withhold funding from the United States Supreme Court until and unless they come out with an enforceable code of ethics. I introduced a bill or an amendment to a bill last year to do that. Republicans wouldn't hear anything about it. Doing the same this year, too. We've got to continue to spread awareness of the obvious deficiency of the highest court in the land, who really just allows their members to take gifts and act in ways that any other court would not allow. It's unacceptable, and it should be non-ideological for us to have an enforceable court code of ethics for every Supreme Court justice. The next question. The Fed keeps raising interest rates, and I'm worried this continued policy is going to make it harder for me to achieve my goal of owning a home. What can you do to mitigate these challenges for people like me? And this is Ted from Carlsbad. Well, first, let me just say that addressing costs is a top priority, I think, for me and for so many of my colleagues in Congress, and really on both sides. But the thing is, we actually have plans that would help. And as I said before, a lot of what Trump and the Republicans are offering with tariffs and deficit finance tax cuts for rich people and restrictive policies on so many different fronts would actually hurt prices, raise inflation, and so forth. So let's talk about housing specifically. We have a plan to create 2 million new units of housing. This is something that the administration's released. It's something that I strongly support. And there are a number of congressional steps that are necessary to make it a reality. One is to dramatically increase and improve the low-income housing tax credit to make more of these projects pencil for developers. Another is to create a far more robust first-time homebuyer tax credit and a renter's tax credit. All these are really, really important. The other thing, I support hedge funds not being able to just go buy up the single-family housing stock. And we've got legislation that would prevent that. Single-family homes, I think, should be for families, not for Wall Street. As simple as that. And then also costs across the board, energy, food, cracking down on price gouging and market manipulation, as I mentioned before. All these are so important. And it's all part of a holistic package of being for people, average, everyday people, rather than for those at the very top. And that's so much of what I see right now from Trump and from Republicans, like my MAGA Republican opponent. I think they're in it for themselves, and I think we're in it for you. Next is Muriel from Vista. Can you explain what you think, in your opinion, needs to happen to secure the border and to change our immigration policies? So I said this before, Muriel, and thank you for the question. I think that the bipartisan border security deal would have gone a long way. Wouldn't have fixed every problem that we've got, but it would have gone a long way, I think, to actually address a lot of the challenges that we see. The president embraced some of that package by moving forward with his executive action on asylum. Now, what we've seen since that executive action is that the number of interactions at the southern border has gone down, depending on whose estimate you see, maybe 40%. San Diego has been particularly challenging because of the countries from which a lot of different migrants arrive. There are ones that we don't have repatriation agreements with: China, India, you name it. I mean, some of those countries, and I've been there and I've seen them coming over. And it's unacceptable that it would be easier to pay a cartel to come over illegally around a port of entry, between a port of entry, instead of going through the legal created path from Customs and Border Protection for those genuinely seeking asylum with genuine, credible fear that they would go through and use the CBP-1 app and go through a port of entry. And so we've got to do everything we can to align the incentives such that people use the legal path. The other thing I'll say, to truly have, I think, a better handle on asylum, is you've got to have far more immigration judges than we have and far more Border Patrol agents than we have. Right now, we've got about 19,000. We need more like 22,000. We've got to figure out how to recruit and retain So we get to 22,000 and we stay there. Second, on immigration judges, we've got around 700 in the country today. Each of those judges has thousands, 4,000, 4,500 of migrants on their docket. And that's why the delay in getting the docket processed now up to, depending on the estimate you see, up to 3.3 million is what I saw recently, a report from Brookings. It could take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. It's unacceptable that our asylum system would be so broken. And so what do we need? We need more immigration judges. We need non-adjudicatory alternatives for processing those seeking asylum. And we need the asylum system to actually not just be a shortcut to come to the United States, but really represent a true path for those who are genuinely in need, for those who are legitimately fearing political violence, sexual violence. That's what asylum was designed to do. So, look, I'm going to continue working in good faith with anybody that will work with me of either party, as I said before. We have a bipartisan bill called the Dignity Act. The Dignity Act would add, in addition to a lot of the border security measures we've been discussing, a lot around path to citizenship, farm workforce modernization, making it so that you, if you're a farm agricultural worker, I was just meeting with our San Diego Farm Bureau the other day, that you have a renewable work visa and eventually a path to citizenship if you pay taxes and you play by the rules and you're a person contributing positively to our society, to our economy. And we need a stable agricultural workforce. And we also need our dreamers, I believe, who are contributing positively as well to stay. And so I am a strong supporter of the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, the Dream and Promise Act, and the Dignity Act. And I'm going to keep at it. Just like we were told when I got to Congress, we'd never get a climate bill done because the politics were hard. I've been told the same about comprehensive immigration reform. The reality has been that far too many politicians in Congress want the optics rather than the agreement and the resolution. In other words, they want to use the issue of immigration or border security to score political points to try to win an election. It's unacceptable. This is a matter of national security, and it should be nonpartisan, and that's my commitment. The next question comes from Elizabeth from Encinitas. Elizabeth asks, I believe Israel is committing war crimes in their ongoing operation in Gaza. Your constituents deserve an update from you on how the U.S. is working towards a ceasefire. Let me just say, Elizabeth, thank you for the question. I support the administration's work, what they're doing right now, trying to get a hostages deal and a ceasefire deal in Gaza. We've got to support that work. We need it urgently. Secretary Blinken, I know, has been working very hard, or diplomats have been working very hard with the Israelis on a viable proposal. And my understanding is that everybody agrees with that proposal except for Hamas. Hamas now needs to agree to that proposal as well on the terms that they laid out during previous rounds of negotiation. That's critically important. Hamas rejected a deal after reports that Hamas leadership wants this war to go on. I think that's an important statement. The leadership of Hamas rejected a deal because they want this war to go on. It's terrible. We can't abandon the Americans still in Gaza, the hostages still in Gaza. We've got to do all we can to get them released. We can't also, at the same time, abandon the Palestinian people. It is an absolute tragedy to see what's happening to them. And we've got to do all we can to try to see a peaceful resolution. And unfortunately, too many of the Palestinian people are being used as pawns by Hamas. It's unacceptable. It's inhumane. So look, the administration continues to push negotiations. I continue to support their efforts. And look, they're not only critical as pertains to the Israel-Hamas conflict, they're also increasingly critical as pertains to the conflict with Hezbollah. We know that unfortunately has been ramped up. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorist group is firing missiles at Israeli citizens every day, and they're violating a UN security resolution requiring its militants stay back from the border. The situation is becoming untenable. It must de-escalate, but like Hamas, Hezbollah doesn't appear to be interested in diplomacy. Both diplomatic efforts are incredibly challenging. If they were easy, it would have been fixed long ago. They deserve the attention of our government and governments across the world, and certainly they're top of mind for me and for my colleagues in Washington. Shifting gears, Melissa from Laguna Niguel asks, I've been trying to find an affordable place to rent in Orange County, but it's impossible with the amount of single-family homes that are just unaffordable for someone at my stage in their career. What can you do to push for the creation of more housing units for young professionals like myself have a chance to live in your district? You know, Melissa, it really is an outstanding question, one that I think about a lot. And as I said earlier, I think we've got to dramatically expand our housing supply. No way around it. It's got to be a coordinated effort. I mentioned the federal plan to build 2 million units of housing across the United States, but it's got to be at the state and local level as well. And the tools that the federal government has are really related to tax policy, grants to incentivize home building, and we've got to use those tools to the greatest extent possible. We've got legislation called the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act that would improve an existing tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit, to support the building, as I said, of 2 million new affordable homes. I'm also co-sponsor of the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act that would create a new tax credit to help develop and rehab another 500,000 homes. And finally, as I mentioned, I'm a co-sponsor of the Hedge Fund Control of American Homes Act to phase out and then ban hedge fund ownership of single-family homes. I think all those efforts would help, and we've got to do more than that, but that would be a good start. And then Stephanie from Ladera Ranch, she asks, what's your message to voters who'll say they'll stay home this November because they're tired of being forced between the lesser of two evils? Thank you, Stephanie. Well, look, as I mentioned before, the debate on Thursday was concerning. For different reasons, I was concerned by the different candidates. And, you know, obviously, I think that everybody's going to have to make their decision come November, but I will take President Biden over President Trump any day for many different reasons. I think at the current moment, we all need to give President Biden a minute to speak with his key advisors over this July 4th holiday. And as that happens, and as they discuss the best path forward, I'm committed, as I always have been and always will be, to delivering results for our district. That's really what it's all about for me. Representative is not just a job title, it is a job description. And I wake up every morning not thinking about national political news, not obsessed with social media as much as I'm thinking about our district, our priorities, our issues. What can I do to move the needle on the projects and investments that will make a difference in our communities? That's ultimately why I'm sent, I believe, to Washington, D.C. And it's an honor of a lifetime to get to continue to do that work. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to do it. And I just can't thank you enough for that question and for everything that you do as constituents to inform us of your opinions. And I have to tell all of you that you ask excellent questions, as always. And I just thank you for keep showing up. You show up to our house parties, you show up to our town halls, and I just can't thank you enough. So with that, I really appreciate all these great questions. And I can tell you that we've got about 4 months to go until the election. I hope if you haven't had the opportunity to go to our website, I think that the map in particular, the new interactive map, I hope is something that you take a look at. Again, www.mikelevin.org. I encourage you to follow us across social media. We try to be as accessible and as available to everybody as we can be. And you can always submit a question or a comment to our website as well at mikelevin.org. So with that, thank you to everybody for tuning in. I want to thank, again, my great campaign staff for their hard work. I want to thank everybody on the official side as well for all their diligent work as well. I have a great, great team. I'm truly grateful. And last but certainly not least, I want to wish my wife and kids a couple of great milestones. Congratulations to my son on his 12th birthday just last week. Pretty exciting. I have a 12-year-old son, 10-year-old daughter, and to the love of my life, my beautiful, wonderful wife, Chrissy, who puts up with me and this crazy, hectic schedule of being a member of the House of Representatives, where I'm gone quite often. My love to you on our 13th wedding anniversary. It was the best decision of my life, and I'm so grateful and honored to get to spend my life with you. And I look forward to seeing my family very soon. And I'll see you all at our next town hall or before very soon. Thank you all for tuning in.